This is the We Are Her podcast for survivors of abuse or assault to share their stories. I'm your host, Emily Kemp, and I'll be having a conversation with a different survivor each week. I want to be sure to include a strong trigger warning with this podcast. The content we discuss includes topics related to violence. Listener discretion is advised. And hello and welcome to the We Are Her podcast. Full disclosure, we are recording this episode during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we are using technologies that we have not used before. We're all recording remotely from our separate locations. I'm in my bedroom, so this is going to be new for us, and we're just gonna roll with it. But I do have our guest here with us, and hello.
Hi.
And do you want to just take a minute to introduce yourself and who you are?
Yeah, I'm Alisa Zapersky, and I am in Washington, D.C. right now in my apartment with my dog and my partner, and I am a childhood sexual abuse survivor, and I offer survivor-to-survivor emotional support through my blog, healinghonestly.com. as well as giving talks and workshops around the country to support survivors in their own communities.
Oh, thank you for your introduction. And yeah, we can't see each other, everybody who's listening, so we're gonna kind of stumble our way through this together, but it feels kind of nice to, I don't know, be connecting with another survivor right now and like in this moment of solidarity, even though it's kind of a strange time and we don't have the technology we're used to using for the podcast. It still feels really nice to have this connection with you.
I feel exactly the same way, and there's so much, social isolation, social distancing, all of this,
Right.
And I think that for so many survivors, the coping mechanisms that we have learned to use and develop over time to soothe ourselves and support ourselves, a lot of them have been like radically interrupted right now.
Mm-hmm.
And just feeling like connected with each other is so not just good, but like necessary and essential, and a source of resiliency right now.
Yeah, I heard a really great kind of reframe that this isn't about social distancing, it's about physical distancing, and we can still try and remain connected to each other. And that was really helpful for me. Yeah, because, I'm a survivor as well. And so that means that sometimes my anxiety in these types of situations can start spiking. And I'm really grateful for this moment with you here this morning.
I feel exactly the same way. And I just see a lot, like, especially I noticed this week a lot on social media, also living in DC, where it's like a city full of like very type A, like overachieving people, that there's just like this whole pressure of like optimizing your time at home.
Right.
And there was this thing on Instagram I saw, which was like, you don't have to make the most out of a global pandemic. And I just feel like also as survivors, it's so important to connect together to like identify what these stories that are being told about like what we're supposed to be doing in this moment, what they're like, where they're coming from, and that like all we need to do is take care of ourselves and each other, and that's right. That's it.
There's no wrong way to feel right now.
Yeah,
it's okay. I saw the meme game right now is just amazing.
Really strong. Really
so
strong.
Good. Thank God for the internet. But someone posted a meme about like how all they did one morning was stare at their own leg for 45 minutes. I'm like, yeah, I don't think there's anything that we should be doing. And I think it's particularly triggering for people who have had their power taken away to have all of these messages about others, saying what they should or shouldn't be doing. And the pressure of that is like, it can feel yucky and overwhelming.
Totally. And so much of it is like really rooted in capitalism and ableism, which frankly are two things that like got us into this mess to begin with,
Right.
which is like this obsession with productivity and like producing something and
Yes.
like being a human who produces things. Um, and that being like our inherent like drive and worth and how we should be organizing our days and our lives. And
Right.
yeah, just taking care of you and the people around you is that's that's the whole game. That's the
That's
whole
it.
thing.
That's all we need to do right now. And this is really, yeah, this conversation is going to be, I can already tell, like very nourishing for me right now. Um, yeah, and like full transparency, I know I'm the host of the podcast, but I'm just a human too. So,
Yes, yes, exactly. And yeah, I think that I feel the exact same way.
well, thanks. And with that all being said, I think we'll kind of move into what we usually talk about on the podcast, which is our guests sort of um, sharing their stories and what that looks like and means to them. So I just kind of invite you to start sharing in whatever way or wherever in your timeline makes the most sense to you.
So it's always so funny to be like, I think if somebody asked me like where my mental health journey began or where my trauma journey began, and I was like, wow, that is like a really good question because I have no idea. Um,
Mm-hmm.
which is I think is true for so many of us. So um, I think I'm going to start by describing where I was when I started doing the work, when I launched the blog, Healing Honestly. It was 4 years ago. And I was working in DC here, and I was working at my background was in like reproductive rights, and I worked at Planned Parenthood and places like that. Um, and I was harassed by the CEO of my women's rights organization, who is a man,
Mm,
of course, and left. And a lot of that was like also mirroring things that I was doing in my personal life, and it was very triggering for me. And I realized that had been I had been having some unresolved feelings about my own trauma of
mm,
being a childhood sexual abuse survivor who was harmed by their biological father. And I, my relationship to my survivorship has always been really complicated, like so many CSA survivors. I didn't really understand or experience my trauma until I experienced a different secondary trauma when I was 20 years old in college. And I talked to so many college students who like it's the same thing where like that age, some because we're like away from home or because we're experiencing other traumas, like our childhood sexual abuse like gets triggered for the first time, and we start experiencing and basically reliving our trauma that we didn't really weren't like consciously aware of. And so that was
right.
really what was happening with me all throughout my 20s was um, my body and like deep parts of my mind trying to communicate to me that things were really unsafe and that something terrible happened to me that wasn't my fault, that I didn't remember. um, and um, and that and that I had to take action in my own life to take care of myself and prioritize my own safety. And so that was really like where when I started to take action and like and decided, you know, I left this job. I had the financial privilege to leave this like really triggering and traumatizing job. And
Right.
I was just like, you know what? I just got to burn it all down to build it all back up.
Right. And can I just ask if it's safe for you to do so? Would you mind talking a little bit more about what, you're talking about like your mind and your body communicating to you, like something is wrong, I am not safe. Like what was that experience like for you?
Oh, yeah. So when I was really in the thick of being like re-traumatized for the first time and experiencing what I like would describe as sensory or body memories was in my early 20s. And really where it was showing up for me was in nightmares and nightmares of being harmed by my father, that like really went into like daytime visions as well. Every time I would think about him, I would get like physically ill, like I would get sick to
Hmm.
my stomach. Every time I was near him, it would take like days for me to recover. I would just be like, now what I recognize, like very, very triggered, and be
Sure.
having panic attacks and anxiety attacks. And, um, you know, Jennifer Freud, who's a researcher and an expert in sexual trauma, as early as like the 1990s, was studying how child sex abuse survivors can forget what happened to them, and then those memories resurface not as like narrative memories that have a clear like beginning, middle, and end, but rather memories that are really like reactions to things that are going on in your life. So for me, it was like a reaction to being near my father, or a reaction to thinking about him, or a reaction to a song that reminded me of him. And it was really like these physical experiences where my body was trying to tell me something that was really just not available for me in my mind. And I think for so long I felt really isolated by that, and I felt like I must be the problem, or there was something wrong with me. I mean, it took me a year to tell my therapist about the nightmares, because I thought I was confessing to her that I was like that I was sick, or that I was disturbed. I was so stigmatized by that because I didn't know anybody else who had experienced that.
Right. I mean, it's something obviously that we don't talk about very much as a society or individually. We don't do a lot of education around it. It's something we would prefer not to talk about because it's uncomfortable. And I also wanted to back up and I really appreciate that description of your kind of your body memories. I think if you haven't experienced something like that, it's really hard for people to conceptualize what that feels like. And so we tend to assume that people are, again, having those narrative memories and with the beginning, middle, and end, and there's an arc, and you can put words to it, and you can rationalize and understand and conceptualize it. Um, that's not really how it works for a lot of people. And it reminds me of, I'm sure you know, The Body Keeps the Score
Yeah,
by
yeah,
Vanderkolk.
yeah,
Amazing book. And that book was really helpful for me to understand how trauma is stored in the body, and not always as like a memory, but that our physical biology, our neurology, like rehardwires itself, and that can like come back up again later, many, many, many years later. And then because it just seems to randomly pop up, it's hard to connect it back to what is causing it, like, oh, here I am, 25, and all of a sudden my nervous system is going haywire, and why? I can't figure it out. So it's really confusing to connect the dots.
totally. And I think that, something that I hear from survivors so often is the like, I was fine for so long. Why? And like now, and now I'm not. And I just want to like reiterate like how completely normal that is. And so this psychologist, this expert, Jennifer Frey, for whom a lot of Bessel van der Kolk's work was informed by, as early as 1992, she was studying this in child sex abuse survivors and developed her theory of betrayal trauma. And what's really amazing about her betrayal trauma work is that it actually found that how little we remembered of our childhood sexual abuse was actually in direct relationship to the level of betrayal we experienced. So it's not just that like so many of us don't remember what happened to us because we were really young. Like a lot of people think it's because like, oh, you were young, so you don't remember as much.
Right.
It's actually like not true. Like her study actually shows that how dependent we are on the people who harm us is in direct relationship to us not remembering. And so like what her research found was that for so many of us, like myself, when we're harmed by a parent, somebody essential, somebody who we need for survival, that we are that actually can inform like our lack of memory about what happened.
That makes so much sense when you explain it that way, that the brain would be like, no, no, we're in survival mode. We need this person because we're, dependent on them as a child.
Totally. And those instincts are not wrong, and that's also something that I just want to say is like, you know, our brains were not wrong to respond like that. We needed to survive. And that's what our brains needed to do to get us to survive. It doesn't mean that that's how we have to continue to live as we heal and as we move forward. But, I try to always encourage people to, and myself included, to to be really compassionate about what like child me did to survive, including things that like are not conscious decisions. The other part of that I think is like really, really important and like deeply, deeply misunderstood is like for those of us that don't have these like clear narrative memories, I think there's this like conventional thinking that you have to remember in order to heal. And like
Mm.
there's like literally no science that suggests that that's the case. I've
I
talked
know
with
it can actually be re-traumatizing for people if you try to rip open like Pandora's box.
and like try to like force that part of your brain. I've talked to like a social worker who worked with in a rape crisis center during the like in the 90s during the like Ruhypnol
Right.
pandemic, and she was like all of my patients didn't remember what happened to them, and there
Right.
was no way they could. They were drugged, and like healing was available to them. And I agree with you. Like, not only is it not necessary, it can be totally like in conflict with healing. And the other thing is like that like there are different ways of like quote unquote like not remembering or forgetting, and some of it is like a subconscious decision like our brain makes, and some of it like to like repress things, and some of it is that like our brain never made those memories to begin with, so we could spend
Right.
like our whole lives trying to like dig something out that like literally isn't even there.
Right. Not in the way that we would want it to be or that we think we should have to have access to it.
Totally, totally. And so, like, that's really been the wild thing about this work that I've been doing is like in 2017, in May of 2017, God, I guess it's like almost 3 years ago, I wrote this story on my website called something like "What It's Like to Not to Remember What You Don't Remember."
Mm,
And it felt like this confession. Like,
mm,
I had started my blog because I really felt like I just wanted a place on the internet where we could talk about the realities of being young people healing from childhood sexual abuse in a way that felt just like this acknowledgement that like trauma was impacting every part of our lives, and also like we are entitled to full and vibrant lives, like that both of those things can be true at the same time. And
yeah.
also, like, you and I've talked about this, like I'm a Jew and I come from a beautiful tradition of my tribe of like finding humor in the suffering.
Yes.
I wanted a place where I could just be myself like that, and like with a little humor too. Anyway, and so
Well,
I,
and humor in these types of issues feels like I think people get kind of offended, that,
oh my God.
and obviously you would never want to make light of someone else's story, but I think if we can find levity within our own experiences, that in and of itself is like kind of innately healing, at least for me, and it
I
sounds like for you
do.
too.
And it's like truly, like literally a source of resiliency.
Hmm.
I get some emails sometimes. It's been a while. Um, from people I think much older than us, who are like, "You're not taking your what happened to you seriously because of your humor," um, and like there are lots of ways to talk about your own story and what is supportive for you in healing. And like it doesn't have to, everybody's thing doesn't have to work for each other, but like that was part of my problem is like though, and why I wanted to start my own website is because I like literally I would submit like stories to different blogs and stuff like that, and they would tell me I had to take the humor out. And it just
Mm.
like do you want me to be like this specific vision of a like sad, like traumatized child sex abuse survivor? Because like that's actually not like
Who you are?
I am hella traumatized and I'm funny as shit. Like Jesus, like
It can be both.
it can be both. In
And
fact,
that's what I really love. Some of the online communities that are forming of
yeah.
survivors and some of the different resources that are out there, like on Instagram. I know we sort of, like our traditional understanding of what counts as a legitimate resource, I think it kind of makes people think that those online communities are somehow not accurate or, but I do think what's cool is that for a lot of marginalized communities, including communities of survivors, we're able to just like create spaces that are all ours. And it's like, well, if you don't like it, too bad. This is, this is how I've chosen to be in community. And also, you can't tell me how to heal. And I've seen a
Yeah,
lot of that sentiment out there in these online communities where it's like these traditional modalities and ideas of what you have to be doing or how you have to be behaving. It's like, nope, I get to decide how I want to heal, and you can't force that on me.
totally, totally. And it's like, which offends you more? Like what happened to me, or that I have found the strength to like find, like to laugh,
Right.
like really what is so offensive. And I recognize like from other survivors, it's coming from like a place where they've like been traumatized because like they have not been taken seriously. But like, let me tell you something, nobody's going to take you more seriously or less seriously because you make jokes about it. Like, nobody wants to take survivors seriously to begin with. Like, rape culture is so real, man. And rape culture will tell you that, like, if you just change this one way about being a survivor, people will, like, validate and affirm what you've been through who, like, don't get it. But it's
Right.
like,
And not just with humor. If you're too angry, if you're too sad, if you're too emotionless, if you're, if you have too many emotions, if you like, it just feels like you can't do it right or please anybody. So I've been seeing a really cool, like empowering movement in those online communities where it's basically like, fuck you, we're gonna do this our way.
totally, totally. And it's just like, I think the one thing, so I did this survey a while ago. Well, not a while, just a couple months ago, but, and it's still open. So you can go to my Instagram to Alisa Zapersky, and it's like in the link. So you can check it out if you want. But I was just like curious about, these like untrue stories that were told as survivors that are like derived from rape culture. Then we hear it all the time, and we even hear them from people we love, and then we internalize them. And I just was like curious like how pervasive some of these are. And so the
Right.
survey was just like a list of these untrue stories, and then I ask, whomever wants to participate to just like click which ones they hear, in their own heads, and from other people. And the one that's like, there's some perfect survivor out there, and for whatever reason, like I am not it. And it was like
I
90%
know.
of the like hundreds and hundreds of survivors who had responded, and it's just like, I think that it's weird, but that it is like one of the unifying experiences of being a survivor is actually like the way we're made to feel exceptional, in that like there's something inherently wrong with our story or our healing or who we are, and that there are some people like they're the whole real survivors and they're us. And that individualism of that, of like, oh, I'm not one of them. But the irony is that like that is actually one of the most like universal and unifying aspects of
Right.
being a survivor.
I'm just like I'm hearing so much wisdom and strength in kind of how confident you are in your identity as a survivor and like where you are now. And I'd like to just kind of maybe back up and talk a little bit more about like how did you get here? Because you're like, I can't even see you. We're not even on Zoom right now, or I'm just talking to you and I can feel like your strength and like, your confidence and your power coming through so strongly. And just like what did that journey look like for you? How did you get to this point?
There are a couple of sort of place I grew up like so many child sex abuse survivors, I think, being like a people pleaser and really wanting people to like me, and wanting to put other people's needs over my own. It's really truly what I was like conditioned to do. Um, and you know, something like specific to child sex abuse, when the harm is going on for like so long, right? And even if the physical harm stops, the psychological harm continues, that like there's just so much gaslighting, and I remember being a kid and being told I was like dramatic and overly sensitive, and I recognize now that that kid was like trying to communicate that they were in great pain and great harm and didn't know how, and like was doing the best
Right.
that they could, and that the adults around me had um no real understanding of what that meant. Um, because like we still don't really talk about the fact that like when kids are disclosing, it almost never sounds like disclosure. It's
Right.
like, oh, this thing, like rarely is it like this very specific thing happened. Like I didn't even remember anything. It's
Right.
just that I was crying all the time and having panic attacks if I had to see my father, you know? So I grew up believing that I was overly sensitive, that I was a drama queen, that I wore my heart on my sleeve, that I needed to toughen up. Because those are messages that I received my whole life. And
So on some subconscious level, the adults and parents and adult figures in your life were reinforcing this idea that you had to just stuff it. Like,
yeah, I went to a childhood therapist when I was in fifth grade, which is when a lot of stuff like sort of like came to a head for me as a child. And I went to a child psychologist. I remember really, really, really calmly talking to her in her office and just saying, like, I don't wish anything bad, any harm or pain to happen to my father. I just wish he didn't exist.
mm,
I didn't want to feel guilty about like, I feel guilty if he died. I feel guilty if, you know what I mean? Like if harm came to him.
right.
I just didn't want him to exist. And she said, well, let's focus on something good that he's good at. What's something he's good at? And I said, I guess he's good at cooking. And she's like, good, let's focus on that. And I think about that a lot. I think about that a lot. This was a child psychologist, and in retrospect, I look at that and I'm like, that kid was so reasonable, so rational, was giving like a very eloquent solution to a
Right.
really difficult problem.
And what a missed opportunity to dive a little bit deeper. Like, what's that about?
Like,
And
why?
also to just validate you, to
Yeah.
validate your feelings.
Instead, it was like, no, you need to focus on positive things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I internalized that a lot. I also grew up in my father who harmed me was not in my household. I had visiting with him on the weekends. I grew up with my mom, my stepfather, and my sister. And my stepfather and my mom married when I was 2, so he was like, I describe him as like my father because he was there every day. And I remember my mom when I was really young saying that, about me and my stepfather. She said, you don't have to love him, you just need to respect him. And so loving him always felt like a choice. And it was so easy to love him. And he loved me as though I was, he loved me as his child, as his own. And I think that there's such a purity of that love where it is not this like idea that you have to love somebody because you're biologically related to them. It was a choice.
Right.
And I think that having him in my life is what made me be able to get through my childhood. And when I was 20, when I was in college, he died of cancer, and I was there, helping take care of him at the end. Um, and I think that was for me the trigger that
Yep.
triggered all of my trauma, was that the wrong father had died. That I had had this father who loved me and made me feel safe and made me feel important and smart and loved. And I had this father that was like, felt like a parasite and just wanted to take from me until there was nothing left. And the wrong parent died.
And grief is such a trauma of its own that it can like blow things wide open.
And that was the first time I was diagnosed with PTSD, was
Mm,
in that grief. And I don't think we really understood, leaving me and my therapist, like that the trauma was really complicated at the time. The trauma was like having watched him die. Of course, the trauma was actually like a lot of things that came to a head. So I think
and I really appreciate that too. I just want to like this idea that each trauma exists separately in its own tidy little box and
right.
that they don't interact with each other. It's much more of like a tapestry where yeah, you can like pull out an individual strand, but they are all touching each other.
I
And they influence each other.
Absolutely. And, I think, that was 11 years ago. And now I'm able to miss, like, I feel like they've emotionally separated a little bit in my life, but for years I could not experience my trauma of my biological father without the grief at the same time. And so
Right.
it was extremely overwhelming all the time. And it was so difficult to explain to people that I was okay until I wasn't okay. And that this death was not just the death of somebody I needed the most, but it was also the what was holding it was the floodgates that were holding back um, all of this trauma, and so to me, your really thoughtful question about like finding my own, confidence and understanding and healing, like that journey, it's just it's so layered, and I feel like it's so important for like survivors to know that like our healing changes so much as we grow and we change, and it's so nonlinear. And I know we talk about like nonlinear as being like it's up and down and back and forth and blah, blah, blah. But it's like not just that. It's not just like we have good days and we have bad days. Like
Right.
it's whole years. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
that are
And it's a
different.
lot of like conflicting truths existing at the same time.
Totally, totally. And like I dealt with that when I was 20, but I didn't cut my biological dad out of my life for like another 3 years. And
Right.
because I was able to just sort of avoid him geographically, and it didn't come to a head. And then it came to a head. And then I was able to put it away again for a couple of years. And then the stuff with my like shitty boss harassing me and being a piece of shit, like that then triggered
Right.
more stuff. And I was like, now I'm back, like it's not just like, oh, some days are like really gnarly. It's like, nah, man, like some chapters are
Right.
like really gnarly.
Right. But that can still be
uh,
peppered with like really beautiful moments too. And I think that that part is like hard for
totally,
people to wrap their head around, that you can sometimes like be okay and not okay at the same time, that you can be
hell
really,
yeah,
really in a dark place and still sometimes find like these big moments of light.
totally. And I speak on college campuses a lot, and one of the keynotes that I give is just about like healing from sexual trauma while on campus. And and the thing is like, yeah, so John, my stepfather died like literally right in the middle of college, like June, like the middle of the summer, in between my like sophomore and junior year. And so I had this like line in the sand, but I also like have wonderful memories from my life after college. And all of those things are true. Like I cried I cried so hard that I like thought I was going to like I thought I needed to like go to a doctor because I thought something was like truly breaking in my body as I cried. And that like the same night I would then go out and like go dancing and then like fall asleep spooning a burrito in my bed and like
Oh my God. So many college flashbacks with that one.
right, right, and like all that shit is true all at once. And
Right.
that's like really what inspired me to do my work is I was like, all of this shit is true at once. Like we are also like fully alive and trauma is impacting everything. And that's okay. Like
And we're so
we are
culturally bad at the nuance of all of that, which is why I really appreciate these conversations where we're kind of shedding light on the very complicated nature of all of this from a first person perspective, and not just from some, scientific article, or from some psychologist, or just like it's real and raw and it's true.
totally, totally. And I agree. And I think, you know, we as survivors, we're like supposed to have one of two options, which is either that we're like broken and damaged goods and that we need to like self isolate and heal before we're ready to be like good for other people, which is like the like bullshit of like, oh, I need to love myself before I can love anybody else. And it's like, yo, some of us have like are missing the neurotransmitters to love
Right.
ourselves, but like we are still worthy of love.
Right.
But and so there's like the like self isolate because like we're broken and damaged, and then there is the like, oh, we have to pretend like this isn't impacting us at all.
And
Like
also
we're out.
that like if you're broken or damaged, that you're going to harm other people. I really
Oh
dislike
my god, yeah,
the message that survivors like have to stay away from each other until they're like, some cookie cutter idea of what we think healed or healed enough looks like before you're
yeah,
allowed to go be in connection with other people. It's just such a harmful narrative.
Totally, totally. And at the same time, I feel like there's like an important nuance to that too, which is like and it was a conversation I was having with a friend the other day, which is also that like we are also as survivors, we are responsible for the harm that we cause other people.
Yeah,
The way everyone is responsible for the
right.
harm that we cause other people. And like all of those things can be true at the same time,
Yep.
right? Which is like it doesn't mean that we have to isolate. It means that like when we are going through a difficult time and we may inadvertently cause harm to other people, we have to hold ourselves responsible and accountable to that. But that also doesn't mean then you're supposed to isolate. It just means like everybody's needs and feelings matter,
And that there
you
are
know?
ways to do accountability well without making people feel ashamed or or like unworthy.
Totally, absolutely. And so, yeah, I mean, I think like of the things that I get requested to write or talk about, so much of it has to do with like sex and dating and relationships. And I just think there's this idea, especially I think for child sex abuse survivors, we're just supposed to be grateful that we're like, that we made it out, that, and like move on with our lives, whatever that means. But like there's not always a lot of like attention given to the fact, the like now what of it all, like now what the hell are we supposed to do. And also that like it's totally like you don't just have to be like grateful that you made it, like you can, you're like entitled to and worthy of like a really full badass life that you want. Sometimes I get frustrated because like I have a really amazing partner in my husband Charlie, but sometimes people talk to him or about him like he's just like this, they call him, you know, like this mensch. And he is like a really amazing, awesome human. Like, don't get it twisted.
Right.
Sometimes I feel like people are sort of saying it as though like he he's just like this miracle, you know, this like sort of miracle worker, or like it's so amazing that he, you know, like puts up with my shit. But like, yeah, I'm an awesome partner too.
Right.
Like I have so much love to give, and I'm funny as shit, as you can tell.
Which we can.
And I'm a goddamn delight. And you know, like I also like he's also super lucky.
Right. Right. He isn't this like and I think we have the like knight in shining armor sort of narrative, especially in heterosexual relationships of, you know, like somehow he is saving you or like putting up with, I think is the term you used. I think that's really accurate. Or like, wow, what a saint. What a saint for being with someone who's been through what you've been through. And it's really harmful and just not true.
Yeah, totally. And it like completely erases like sort of the full humanity of us
Hmm.
as survivors, um, and all that we have to offer. Yeah, and so yes, I agree. That's what I'm saying. Is
Yeah.
yes, I agree.
So then you're sort of coming into, you know, to kind of get back to like the kind of narrative arc of your experience, you
Yeah,
know, shit hit the fan after your stepdad died. And
yeah,
it's yeah, that journey therein after was, it sounds like pretty up and down. When did
yeah.
you like where did it go from there?
So, you know, it was so mixed. You know, I was dealing with a lot of the first um, sort of body memories, like having a lot of nightmares and things like that. And it was impacting my ability to have sex or feel safe in my body. Um, and at the same time, like I was young and drinking tequila and going dancing and having fun and going on adventures, and like, you know, all of those things again were true at the same time. When I came back to DC as a young professional, like 23, my biological dad gave me this like ultimatum that either I was to spend more time with him or and like go to counseling with him and all this stuff, or nothing. Like basically he had was calling bullshit on like the boundaries that I had established to keep myself safe. And, you know, that ultimatum for me was really a gift,
Mm,
because I felt like the guilt of pulling away from him might kill me. You know, I was conditioned from the day I was born to see him as a victim and to prioritize his needs over my own. And so I felt really sorry for him all the time, and that is what kept me there and made it hard for me to protect myself. And that ultimatum just like put into stark contrast, like, oh, if I stay, this will kill me. And this like trying to find some fake middle ground with this person who was calling bullshit on middle grounds, wasn't an option anymore. And I think that making that decision at the time, the only person who really knew what I was going through and had my back aside from my therapist was my best friend Kate, who is an extraordinary person. And it was hella trauma informed because she has been working to support survivors since like she was a teenager. And so she really knew how to be there for me. And it was a time where people didn't understand why I was making that decision. I didn't have the language and feel comfortable yet explaining what I had been through as childhood sexual abuse because I was still felt like ashamed that I didn't remember things, and felt like that was invalidating me. And I had to make that decision to cut him out of my life.
I think there are these bigger social narratives too that like family first no matter what. You have
Mm-hmm.
to make it work with your family and go to therapy and like forgive. And it's like, no, you as an individual have every right to put in place whatever boundaries are healthy and safest for you, even if that means cutting out someone important like a parent figure, you know?
Totally. And I think that, my friend Amitha Swadine, who is the founder of the Mirror Memoirs Project, they call it blood supremacy. And I think it's so
Oh,
true. And
yeah.
the idea that like, I am a huge fan of conditional love. And I
Mm,
sort of cringe every time, if I'm at a wedding and people talk about unconditional love and vows and stuff like that. Like love should always have conditions.
right.
Um, it's really important to me. Um, and I totally agree with you. There's so many of the like movies I can't stand of like the shit parent who then like has some redemption arc. And it's just like that. I'm not saying that like if somebody harmed you that you have to cut them out of your life. Like everybody's journey is different. Um, but for me, I just felt like crippled by that. Um, and I was overwhelmed by that sense of guilt because of all of those narratives that like you're not supposed to do that or that,
Right.
I think for so many of us that are survivors, I hear this from people all the time, and I felt this way. It was like, oh, I am responsible for ruining my family.
Right.
I'm the one who ruined the family. And it's like, nah, dude, like they they
Right.
ruined what was
These are
the
the
family.
consequences of their own actions.
Totally. And at the same time, the thing that I think is also really complicated is like, so I was like conditioned to feel sorry for him. At the same time, the really uncomfortable truth that is so hard for us to talk about with childhood sexual abuse is so many people who harm, they themselves have been harmed. And we have this binary of perpetrators and victims. And we really don't have the right, we don't really create the space to have the conversations about the fact that like so many people who cause harm have been harmed. And yet that also doesn't mean that they're not accountable and responsible for the harm they cause,
Right. And
And
you can have
I
empathy
think
for someone else's experience while still doing what you need to do to be safe for yourself.
totally, and I really struggled with that. And I like definitely am in gratitude to all the incredible leaders in the transformative justice movement. Shout out to the book Beyond Survival, which just came out, which is about just like this amazing transformative justice anthology. Um, but I'm like really grateful to all those leaders for basically teaching me that. And because I felt really crippled by that, I thought because I could see my father's humanity and I could see that, maybe like things that he might have been a victim of certain things in his life, because I could see that somehow invalidated me protecting myself. And now I can finally see like, oh no, again, all of this can be true at once.
Right. Which is hard to wrap your head around, even um yeah, even as someone who's like maybe experienced all of that, our brains are just not always hardwired to like conceptualize the overwhelming nature of like what it means to fucking exist.
Totally.
It's
And
hard.
like When we talk about sexual violence, still so much of our language and our orientation to it is like rooted in the criminal justice
Yep.
system, where there are victims and there are perpetrators, and there and like there's that binary, and so that's the way like things are like truly organized. And so it goes really, it goes deep, and we get those messages like everywhere. But I think for me, like really receiving that ultimatum, that really forced me to like forced the decision of like, am I going to protect myself, and my own safety and my own sanity, and being forced to do that with in the face of a lot of resistance from people who were
Mm,
very important to me,
right.
um, really was sort of this, in retrospect, really powerful, important experience that I went through that really made me realize, like, even, this people pleaser person that I was, that, like, at the end of the day, like, I had to figure out how to be my own person and how to protect myself. And I think that really set the the road for and the path for which I've been on since then.
Yeah, so it was a turning point.
It really was. It really was. And then, I went back to some people pleasy kinds of ways, and it ebbed and flowed, and really until I was 27, and I had that work situation where my boss was really replicating a lot of behavior that my dad had, not in a physical way, but in a mental and psychological way. And my dad was trying to re-enter my life as well, and so it was all just like crescendoing. And that's when I again had to be like, okay, I feel like there are so many things in my life that were trying to force me to hide what I had been through. And for me, what was really healing was the thought of, I'm just going to put my name out there. I'm going to make it so Alisa Zapersky goes directly to healinghonesty.com,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to see, I am this child sex abuse survivor. This is what happened to me. No one can ever force me to hide again. And I say that with the caveat of like, I have heard from so many survivors in this particular time within the Me Too movement that feel this like tremendous pressure to be public about what they've been through. And in part because like we like idolize or really put on a pedestal survivors that are public, um, and that can like create the impression that survivors who aren't public are somehow like less courageous or brave, which is totally bullshit. Just like getting through the day as a survivor is an act of courage. Um, but for me, being public is actually what made me feel safer.
Right.
And I say that because that is not true for everybody.
Right. And I think there's power, obviously, in reclaiming your story, and story sharing. I've done some workshopping around like the implications of story sharing. And it doesn't always have to be public. Like, even just writing it in a journal is you taking the story from inside and externalizing it in some way that you have total control over. So, story sharing is really important, but it doesn't have to be in a super public way. I mean, if you want to, awesome. It can be between one other person, it can be between a therapist, it can be to yourself. There's so many ways to do some of that work. And I really appreciate you saying that.
And I'm so glad you said that, because I think that's so important, which is like there are, even I sort of talk about this, like there are so many just degrees of like disclosure, um, both in terms of like sharing with somebody that you can trust, but then also like where I see this come up a lot, in the work that I do and in conversations with survivors, is like around dating, which is like, do I tell the person that I'm seeing that I'm a survivor? And like, first of all, it is totally your call. You are the expert in your own safety, and you're the only one who's the expert in your own safety. So you know what's best for you. But also, if you do decide that you want to say something, like there are so many degrees of sharing that are available to you. And I think again, there's this sort of like all or nothing feeling that that is put upon survivors. Like either I have to like bare my soul to you and like be like, let me list my traumas in alphabetical and chronological order to
Right.
you now, would be like a spreadsheet, versus like, or I'm going to pretend like this really important thing is not a part of my life,
Right.
and I have to hide it.
Totally.
Uh,
Yeah.
and there's like a lot of middle ground,
Yeah.
you know?
And that disclosure can happen over time, and that it is often dependent on trust, and that you don't have to tell somebody like all your shit on the first date, and that if they earn that trust and they become a safe person to you, disclosure can happen, yeah, incrementally, and the depth to which you want to disclose is completely up to you. How you want to disclose is completely up to you. I was talking with a survivor who I thought this was so interesting that they use text message with their partner because saying it out loud is too hard. So if there's something that they really want to tell their partner, they will like go and have them go into a separate room and they'll text it to them. And then it lets that person like digest it a little bit kind of on their own terms. And then they may or may not come together and talk about it later in person. But you can get creative. Like there's not one right way to do it.
Totally. And like also the thing that I tell folks is like you can also tell them exactly how you want them to respond. And
Yeah.
like you know, like they may or may not, but the thing is that like most people want to be told exactly
Yep.
how to be supportive in that moment. So it can look like when I was casually like I was having a lot of casual sex, like basically after I cut my dad out of my life and I was like feeling some sort of healing for the first time for me,
Hmm.
I was able to like feel safer in my body and like want to have sex, which was really exciting and awesome. And so I was having like casual sex, which was really cool because I could experiment with disclosing and it felt like the stakes were super, super low
Right.
because I like didn't really care about these people and I didn't know them really well. And so it always felt like, oh, well, if I disclose and it's like doesn't go well, well, like fuck them. Or if I have sex and I'm triggered and I need to stop, like it just felt like very stakes are low.
Hmm.
I can like fully prioritize my own safety. But one of the things I would say is like, hey, just so you know, like this like I like experienced something in my life that like still impacts me today, like a bad thing that happened that still impacts me today. Um, I don't really want to get into it, but you know, like I'm like I'm into you. I want to do this. I want to like have sex, whatever. But like if I might have to just be like, yo, we need to stop. And just know that like when that happens, it has nothing to do with you.
Mm.
Um, it's not something you did wrong. And I just want you to say like, oh yeah, that's cool. I hear you. No worries. I won't take it personally. And that's what I want to hear from you.
Nice. Did it work?
You know? Oh yeah. People love being told what to
Yeah.
do
Well,
and what to
especially
say.
with, again, because we don't have these conversations very openly and transparently, people feel like inadequately prepared to how to respond. And so no one wants to say the wrong thing, no one wants to accidentally harm someone. So if you make it clear for them what you're expecting, it's like, whew, pressure off to just, have to wing it. You can just give them what they want.
Totally. And I just had this conversation in the context of friendship with a survivor. She was saying that she has had a really difficult time maintaining friendships because she will get closer to people and then her trauma will resurface and she will need to turn inward in order to manage that. And that doesn't include being social. And then by the time she feels like she wants to be social again, like those friendships have lost momentum. And that's really a cycle that's been really difficult for her. And so something we talked about, I was like, it was, she felt like she was burdening them by she didn't want to like fully disclose to them and she felt like she was burdening them by like telling them that anything was up, you know? Or asking anything from them. And so we role played and we practiced together. And I said to her, like, okay, well, how would it make you feel if I said to you, listen, I'm going through a really difficult personal thing right now that affects my mental health. I don't really want to get into what it is, but just know that like when it happens and I like need to pull away, that it's not because like I don't want to hang out with you or a friendship. I actually like really like hanging out with you and being friends. It's just that like I need to do that. So when that happens, would you like still be down to continue to invite me to things even if I like can't come, and could you like just send me a text like, you know, once a week or whatever to check in. Like I was like, how would that make you feel? And she goes, it would make me feel really important, and like that person trusted me and thought I was like a, you know, like it would make me feel good about who I was as a friend.
And
And
the
I was like,
strength of
dude,
the
man,
friendship.
right. And I was like, well, why can't you ask that? You know, like, so you can be the one to say that to them too, you know?
Right.
Like people want to be told exactly what to do.
And I really
I believe
appreciate you modeling that for us right now, because that was like, that's a very practical, like tangible language that people and kind of exercise people can take away. I think that's awesome.
I'm so glad. Yeah, I have this fundamental belief that, I mean, like some people are fucked, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
And like I've dealt with some people that like really truly are very selfish and shitty people. We all have. Those people don't really have a place in our
See
healing
ya.
journey. But for the vast majority of people, they're good people who are totally clueless,
Right.
who need to be told exactly what we need them to say. And I think we, as survivors, are conditioned to feel like our needs are a burden, on other people. And in reality, like what we are doing is sort of a gift of friendship, because
Mm,
we're inviting people in and we're telling them, like, you matter to me, and here are the ways that you can be there for me. And I think that it's actually an opportunity to like to celebrate that friendship,
mm.
versus like severing it.
And to grow closer and build a stronger connection in a safe way.
Totally, totally. And I just there's so much space between these this black and white thinking and this binary. And that, like, just for me straight up comes from like 11 years of therapy, because I am a classic black and white all or nothing thinker. I think I'm like that. I mean, it's hard. Like, I have no life before my trauma, so I can't like compare. I think I would probably be like this even if I wasn't a child sex abuse survivor, but being a CSA survivor and a trauma survivor just like makes it so much more
Right.
extreme. Um, but so I a lot of my life has been organized around experimenting with would it be like to be in between those polar opposites.
I love that. That's a really, yeah, that's like a very poignant reflection. I appreciate that a lot.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, it's just I love having these conversations with folks because, I'm also a child sexual abuse survivor. I've also like kind of built my adult life and career around these issues, and every time I have a conversation with someone new, they are able to like gift me with new language to talk about it, and new perspectives and new ways to think about it. And I love that, and it feels like a real gift.
That's really beautiful to hear.
Um, yeah, and I know that you had mentioned therapy as being like a very obviously huge part of your healing. I'm wondering if you can speak to like what else for you right now or in your journey has been healing or continues to be healing.
Totally. So for me, I have done cognitive behavioral therapy on and off for 11 years with 3 different therapists,
Mhm.
because I specifically enjoy women of a certain age and they keep retiring on me.
Hmm.
But I say that with the caveat that like my personality and the way my brain is wired, is like perfectly aligned with cognitive behavioral
Mm,
therapy, with CBT therapy and talk therapy. For so many survivors, that's just not what's healing for them. And so I just want to say, for anybody who has tried talk therapy and for whom that wasn't, a helpful healing modality, just know that like there's nothing wrong with you. Like, there is a therapy that's right for you, whether that therapy is like gardening or journaling or art, or some sort of like more physically
like
oriented
yoga,
somatic
dance.
therapy. Yeah, totally. And so, there are forms of trauma for which like like talk therapy is just never going to be very accessible. And so something that I feel passionate about is like, um deconstructing this like pressure I think there is on survivors, that like there is this one way of healing. Especially I feel like it's a healing that's very oriented to like cis white privileged hetero women.
100%.
That's like therapy and yoga and like pseudo wellness stuff. Anyway, um, so I just like feel very important about that,
Yeah.
strongly about the caveat. For me, a lot of different things have been healing at different times. And so what's been interesting is to see like as I have changed and grown, my needs have changed and grown or shifted. So for a long time, like when I was recovering from that job and when I was like in the burn it all down stage, I actually learned how to box and I went to a boxing gym for 3 years and I like beat the shit out of bags and and that was actually more helpful for me honestly than like a lot of talk therapy was for that time. It was like very physical, very somatic. And when I would be triggered, it would like take me down. And that was like really awesome. Something else that's been really healing for me is my puppy, my dog Franklin. He is a Australian Labradoodle, so he's mostly Muppet, and
Yay!
he is ridiculous. And he gets me out of bed every morning, and he gets me out of my own body, and that's been really important. I want to sort of also highlight some things because depending on when this airs, a lot of us might still be spending all of our time in our apartments. And to offer like some things that have been soothing or healing to me over time that like can be done in our homes. Especially understanding that for a lot of us, we're in homes where we're not safe. So for me, when I've been triggered, something that's been really helpful is to take a really, really cold shower. Like when I feel like I'm sort of out of my body and leaving my body, that like water sort of like shocks me
Mm,
into my body. And that can be really helpful for me. Meditation it sometimes helps, sometimes it doesn't. Puzzles are really helpful for me.
mm,
Again, to like it taps into the like rational part of my brain versus the more like traumatized part of my brain,
right.
and it like gets me into something else. So like doing jigsaw puzzles is really helpful for me. I also found tremendous healing in community, and being in community with other survivors. I think what you all do with your online meetups is such an incredible service. But just like honestly, in coming full circle to what we talked about, your question about like where when like this journey of becoming a like confidently talking about my own survivorship and trauma for me really stems from knowing how deeply I'm not alone. Um, and so it's wild to think when I started this work, I didn't know other child sex abuse survivors. Turns out I was surrounded by child sex abuse survivors my whole
Right.
life. And it just took me like being public about it to know that. But um, knowing how many of us are out there and feeling the same way as us, um, really has been probably the single most transformative thing in my life, in terms of my healing.
Yeah. Yeah, community healing is a huge important piece. I mean, humans are just hardwired to desire to be in community with each other for survival reasons, and I think on a like a really primal level, our bodies and our brains know that. I've also said this before on the podcast, and I want to say it again because I think it's a really important message. Someone told me once about how, especially with interpersonal violence, because that type of violence is happening in a dichotomy or with other people, it's really hard to heal in isolation, and that it can be a really transformative experience to heal with other people. So if you were harmed by someone and that's what caused the trauma, then it can be a corrective experience to then heal with other people. And that's always stuck with me, and I think is a big driving value in what We Are Her does in trying to build a community that's accessible to survivors so that they don't feel alone. Because feeling alone and feeling isolated is is just so harmful, and it can exacerbate mental health issues. It can exacerbate feelings of shame and stigma. um
Yeah, and it's why it's one of the many reasons why I'm so afraid right now,
yes.
for other survivors, and for because because of being in this time of such deep isolation. Although talking to you the last hour, I'm realizing my anxiety has been the lowest it's been in like a week,
Yeah,
which is really amazing. Yeah, when I wrote like 3 years ago, I wrote the article about not really remembering, and it felt like this confession, like I was confessing to my readers, like, hey, I just want you to know that like this thing that like I feel like I've been hiding from you, that I don't actually remember what happened to me, and like I have to be honest with you about that. And it felt like, it felt like risky almost to say it.
right.
And then what was really wild is that it went viral, and it remains the single most popular thing on my website all these years later. And I would still say like 80% of my traffic is for people Googling, like, cannot remember childhood sexual abuse. And it's overwhelmingly what I hear from other survivors about. But I even then posted a other story that I update with just the data of how popular that story is, that I update like
Mm,
every 6 months, because I think it's really important as people read that, then they realize like the magnitude of how many of us feel exactly the same
right.
way,
You're not
right?
alone. You're not crazy. You're not making it up. Your experiences are valid.
And this isn't even like totally, and it's not even that it's like this sort of niche experience. It's
No.
actually like extraordinarily common. And
Right.
you know, my friend Amitha, who I mentioned, the founder of Mirror Memoirs, a project that centers LGBTQ, Black and Indigenous people, child sex abuse survivors of color, and their leadership. They're a CSA survivor, and they say, as horrific as their experience was, what was also so harmful was thinking that they were an exception and that it was
Right.
exceptional. And the harm of that, of thinking that, that they were alone in what they were going through. And I think about that really often, and I feel exactly the same way.
Me too. Um, so I think, first of all, just thank you so much for everything that you shared, your vulnerability, just like you're such a lovely, you are a damn delightful human being. You are a wait, what did you say? Yeah, you're a goddamn delight.
I'm a
You're a
goddamn
goddamn
delight.
delight.
I'm a goddamn.
And so, I've just like so enjoyed this conversation. And what I really like to do, at the end of all of our podcast episodes is just ask if there was kind of one final message that you wanted to share for any survivor who's listening. What would that be?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. For me, if there's one thing I could communicate to every survivor, it's that even if you have trouble believing yourself, know that I believe
Mm,
you, and that I know that your pain is real and your pain matters, and that healing is available to you. You are not alone in this, um, and I know that your pain is real.
mm. That's a really important message that not all survivor gets to hear. So I love that that's kind of the note that we're ending on.
Me too, and I just want to thank you for finding,
Woo!
clever technological solutions for us to have this conversation, because as I said, I mean, dude, this is the best I have felt in a week, and it
Hmm.
has been a week. Um, and so I'm just so grateful. I'm just so grateful for you, for Stevie, for what you're all putting out in the world, and I think that it is more important than ever.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I'm feeling a lot better right now. I heard a really, again, the memes right now, but it was like this week has been like a really hard year or something like that. It's like,
Yeah, no, totally. Like the wildest thing is thinking about where I was exactly a week ago, and just like tracking my own changes. It just really it was just really wild. It was only
right,
8 days
right,
ago that I like ate in the restaurant. And I swear
right.
that was like a
I
different decade.
know. And this podcast isn't going to come out into the summer, and we have no idea where we'll be at that point. But I think the bigger sort of universal message here is that you're not alone and there are people to receive you. Alisa, we are her. There's so many folks out there in online communities, thank God for the internet right now.
Oh my God.
Regardless of where we are, whenever this podcast episode comes out, like we all got to stick together.
Totally. And I wish for every survivor to be able to turn their deep well of compassion inwards and onto themselves, now more than ever.
Mm-hmm. Here, here. Well, I think with that, we'll just end our episode. But again, thank you so much. And yeah, let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Adios.
Ah, that was beautiful. You're the best.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Be sure to subscribe and don't forget to check out our online community at weareher.net. If you or someone you know has experienced abuse or assault, you can always call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233.